Kia ora. Good morning. Welcome everyone to our first joint workshop and about transfer agreements. I'm just going to head straight down to the other end of the table. Kia ora.
Thank you. Good morning. So I have spoken with you all previously before, so just a reminder, Sinead Hart, and I'm in the governance team supporting NAS in QLDC trade orders. So the purpose of today is really just to go through the transfer agreement delivery process. As we know, the transfer agreement is the mechanism by which the water services business is transferred from QLDC to QLDC trade orders. There's a lot of detail that needs to go into that agreement just to be quite specific as to what exactly is transferring, so that there is that clarity. A lot of the content is dictated by legislation. And what we're really trying to achieve today is make sure that we're all aligned in a bilateral negotiation, and we're all aligned as to what the intended process is and what we intend to do to bring a transfer agreement to respective forums for agreement and decision making. Now, probably there will be a few little curves and detours as we go through the process in reality, but this is the intended plan. And as Penny will say, we open or welcome any feedback or any observations people have as we go through the presentation.
John Goto. I just wanted to introduce myself to the board members because obviously you know me. I'm Penny Pearce. I'm currently the acting strategy and policy general manager, while Michelle's being the CE, but my substantive role is the strategy and reform manager. So I have been involved in the work for the last 3 years since I've been here. So I was worked with the NTU as we were initially going to be transitioning to Entity D, and then with the NTU when we were transitioning to Entity J, and then working through the local water to get to the point when we're now establishing QLD3 waters trading name to be decided. So this is very exciting from my perspective because there's been a few different iterations, and the rubber's now hitting the road in terms of actually getting the entity standing up. So this is very exciting. So yeah, just to reiterate what Sinead said, this is a process that the CCO establishment team, so Sinead is going to be doing most of the lead work on, but we're working very closely together, and you'll be working very closely together in terms of the content of how we approach what needs to transfer and how that transfer needs to happen. So this discussion today is just about the process. There are some points in here where we'll get into content, where we'll kind of ask you for some early thoughts to feed into the next sessions, but today is really just about the process so everyone can understand that before we get into it. Excellent. So take it away.
So contents, I know the slides have been shared in advance. You know, the contents are really just going through what is the transfer agreement, probably telling most of you what you already know, but just bear with us. The process and accountability, so this is probably more an internal thing, just being quite clear as to who's providing what in terms of council, who's verifying it from QLDC tree waters, and how we have to work together to get you respective board and council the finished product for review and approval. Timeline, key deliverables, and eyes wider open. So what's eyes wider open? And I'll come to that obviously at the appropriate time. So as I mentioned earlier, the transfer agreement does bring everything together. It's the mechanism that transfers responsibility for water services. So we can do all of this great work, we can do all of this great analysis, we can do all of this strategic planning, but if we don't get the transfer agreement right, we create confusion as to what exactly has to come across. So it's really ring fencing. What is the water services business that's coming across? And then in the context of that separation, what's the interface that supports the enduring arrangements? Because as we know, for example, council will always be the plan maker. The council will obviously be, or the water entity will be the plan taker. But when it comes to building major infrastructure, you obviously have to have a connection between the two because there's a lot of planning that's required and funding. So every work stream that we have within our establishment team has got a place in the transfer agreement. So it is a highly interdependent program of work that we're engaged in, and then Penny and the various council members with responsibility on the opposite side of the bridge, we'll call it, and also as we'll be engaging with each other during that. So I think the key point that we're trying to say about the transfer agreement is the successful transfer of this business, it's not just about the assets, because the assets in and of themselves require the people who look after them, maintain them, decide what needs. The people require processes to obviously work effectively and all of the knowledge that they have from an institutional perspective, and processes require information to function. So what we're trying to do is, I guess, use the transfer agreement as the vehicle to mop up all of that information to ensure that we get that safe transition across. And so the transfer agreement will bring together the assets, the people, the process, contract systems information, and governance arrangements necessary for the company to effectively operate alongside councils from day one. So it will be, we may as well lean into the fact, it will be a little bit of a doorstep. It is going to be quite a big agreement, and that's why we just need to work through it in tranches rather than bring you something in one go. We'll work through it in piece by piece so that we get comfort, a little bit like blockchain. We'll get comfort on one thing, move on to the next, and then it all comes together at the end. So what will we have in it? It's an overview of the content. We will have the assets, so obviously the water-related assets, finance. So as we know, the assets come across, but also the debt that financed those assets comes across. So what's the methodology that's applied in terms of ring fencing what the relevant debt is? And then in addition to that, there will be obviously some other expenses that will come across. So, you know, people smarter than me in the finance team will work through how you do that separation with probably a wash up to follow a few months later. We need to identify what all the contracts are from a capital works perspective, and I know that that's quite large in the context of QLDC. So working through not only what contracts come across, but what's the transition, so nothing is slowed down or no balls are dropped as we go through that process. Property and land is something that we need to identify, with obviously the key principle being that the water services need, or the water services entity needs access to land on which assets are based in order to do what it needs to do. Resource consents come across, so we have to work with the regional council just to make sure that we captured all of that and are aware of the status of each. The staff pathway. So what we have here really is the staff pathway. What I mean by that is, from a contractual perspective, we need to agree what's the process by which staff will transfer. And there's no imposition, I suppose, of staff coming across in the same way as the last reform. It's something that we're working through and just trying to document that so everybody is quite clear as to what the process is. So what is a transfer agreement? I've already said, common view is most people think it's about assets. I think it's actually a lot bigger than that, and you can use it as a real opportunity to put a real lens on the business and identify exactly what's there, warts and opportunities. And as I say here, the legislation does require more. It's about what transfers, what doesn't transfer. I think a key thing is how the organisations work together in terms of those enduring arrangements after 1 July 27. What's roles and responsibilities in terms of planning arrangements? Probably quite key from a customer perspective is who is issuing me my bill, how are my water charges being determined, what's my rights in terms of a customer contact centre, who do I contact? So going through, not in the detail, but at a high level, that would be set out in the transfer agreement. And hopefully not necessary, but dispute resolution would be included in there. Common practice to include, but hopefully academic. And then ongoing review process. So I talked about how there's enduring arrangements in relation to certain things. They'll be fit for purpose at a particular point in time, and just being quite clear as to what's the review process to make sure that that remains the case. So shared interest arrangements is something that Penny and I discussed yesterday, and we'll probably kick this, we'll get this cab off the rank very, very soon. So that's about, as I said before, the future interfaces between the council and the CCO where respective statutory functions intersect. So even after water leaves, council will remain the regulator, and it will retain quite a number of statutory responsibilities. As two entities operating for the benefit of communities, there's obviously a degree of overlap in terms of statutory responsibilities. So just working through how all of that fits together, including we've got emergency management here, charging arrangements, and shared governance. So how are we going to do this, the process? So what we have started, there's kind of 7 steps, but it's really 6 because 2 of those steps are the board making a decision on one and council having its separate decision making as the counterparty to the transaction on the other. So at the moment, what we are doing is engaging in quite a lot of information gathering. So a lot of, I'm going to call it due diligence, and that is, and it's essentially a spring clean, just checking what is everything, what's coming across, what are the risks associated with that, what are the mitigations that should be undertaken to manage those risks, just really getting an understanding. I probably shouldn't just talk about risk. There's obviously opportunities there as well. There's some quite complex decisions that council is navigating. What's the impact of that in terms of the future business? So just really trying to bed down all of what's coming across, what's happening now, how are we ready to receive. And the next step that we will go through is what we call validation. So that's essentially we CCO get all of the information and we play it back to the council staff. And in other CCOs that we have worked in, we have asked that field operators and some of the actual staff on the ground are included in that conversation, because as you bring up pictures of the assets and the land, a lot of intel comes out that you wouldn't otherwise get in terms of access arrangements that may not be as formal as you would like them to be, but we need access. So what does that look like, and what's the arrangement then that becomes on the action list before completion? So we would look at doing that validation probably around November of this year would be the ideal. Separate to that, I talked about chunks. So that's kind of the information side. So if we think of the transfer agreement as the information side, and then the front-loaded part will be the legal terms, the 2 of them will be developed in parallel. And we would like to start bringing legal terms to you in probably September. You'll start seeing them in terms of workshops and content and input into that side of things. So with that, the assurance piece is really we've identified, this is what we've discovered in due diligence. These are the mitigations and providing assurance to both entities, but the board in particular as the recipient of a lot of risks and responsibilities will put us under pressure to give that assurance, rightly so. So yeah, it's just us working through that as well, and there will be input from council required as we work through that just to make sure that everybody is happy. So then we would have the board decision, council decision. In terms of our establishment plan, we're looking to try and achieve that by December, and really obviously progress in terms of the preceding steps will determine if that's realistic, but that's what we're aiming for. And then with the benefit of a signed transfer agreement, absolute clarity as to what's happening, staff offers would start to flow for those staff transitioning under the contractual arrangements. There's obviously going to be external recruitment happening parallel to that as well, which is outside the transfer agreement.
So just a question, Sinead, I talked about it previously, but this talks about the transfers to us. There's in parallel with that, there's a whole lot of QLDC staff. What does that look like so that staff, can see both sides of the picture? Is that intended to align timelines?
Yes. Practical realities, whether these timelines can be met will be dependent on both sides of this. But we're working on the other side of it, which we're calling QLDC of the future. So, what happens on our side, both from a how do we integrate and interface with the CCO, and what risks and opportunities are there on our side that we need to manage, but also then how do we need to reorganise ourselves and rethink about the way that we deliver our services when we don't deliver water services anymore. So yes, that is happening in parallel. So our councillors will be seeing discussions about this side, and then we'll be having, so the actual kind of QLDC of the future part is more operational, but the strategic decisions that feed into that will be a lot of what our councillors are working on. So that's my kind of role on the QLDC side, is how we knit all of that together into something that we can navigate through, because actually the establishment of the CCO and transfer of water services to that CCO is just step one, and what is going to need to be quite a transformation on the QLDC side, because it's only one of the reforms that we're implementing. It's the first one. So we have to think of, we have to stage how we're going to deal with all of those reforms, because they're not all on the same timelines.
Yeah. Have you got a feel for within that how many specialist roles that are not available from the QLDC side that might need to be created to be able to deliver the quality that you're expecting?
We've done some preliminary work on that, and there absolutely are roles there that we will have to go to the market for, and there'll be some contestable roles anyway, because they'll be at the exec level, but the exact number I'm not sure. But our intention is to have as many existing QLDC staff who are in 3 quarters in the CCO.
That is one of the challenges for us on the QLDC side, though, because obviously we have actually quite a small number of specialist staff that work in water and not water, particularly in that kind of strategic planning, investment, that kind of space. And we'll need those skills, and so will CCO. And so navigating what that looks like for both is a key part. Both the exception of the CCO, but the QLDC in the future as well.
Is there thinking given to the fact that what might be done on day one might not be the permanent year 5 model, so there could be sort of an intermediate transition arrangements, I guess?
Absolutely. So we would expect that the transfer agreement would set out a transition path. So there will definitely be arrangements on day 1 that are transitional. Yeah. And so whether we can set out, whether we get as far as being able to say in the transfer agreement, this is what it looks like on day 1 versus year 1, year 3, year 5, we might not get that far. We might, it will depend on some of the other things that are happening, but it might just recognise that they're transitional, and by a certain point, so within 12 months or 18 months, then a plan for the next phase would need to be developed. I mean, ideally, you'd have an eye to the future in the transfer agreement.
Absolutely.
But
And we'll probably want to be a little bit cautious around that too, because we'll be wanting to review our own shop.
And one of the complications for that is the local government simplification, so amalgamation of councils. And so any shared service type arrangement that we agree to for day 1 will also be subject to discussion about whether we are amalgamating with somebody else and setting up shared services at a regional level or sub-regional level. So we've just, the situation in the local government simplification space has just changed in the last 3 days, basically.
I think, Penny, that to me, the QLDC of the future has got a lot of factors in it that we will have some interest of, but really aren't our core. But we need to make sure that we're very clear on our expectations of the shared services, so that at least that's well defined, however it might be, or whoever it might be. We've got that well defined. And I think we will have an interest in, as you do QLDC of the future, of how those services are intended to be delivered.
Yes. So if we're talking about amalgamations, that obviously some of the other councils have got water services CCOs separately as well. So if we're looking at amalgamation, there's going to be kind of multiple things to be taken into account there. But decisions haven't been made about that
And
yet.
I think that's the important thing from our focus, everybody's focus is we don't drop any balls, we keep everything going. And yes, those other things might be interesting to us, but probably not in the near term.
Not day 1.
Not
for that.
And I think it's worth noting that our planning cycle is a 10-year that we refresh every 3 years. So we're often thinking in 3-year chunks. So, in terms of transition, you guys in shared services, we're thinking those first 3 year, the 10-year plan, and then these other factors will start to come in and shape it.
I think it's important.
Sorry, Gavin's been trying to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, obviously we're talking about staff and roles, we're talking about people who are currently in jobs. And so, it's always worried me, the whole process worried me about the frame of mind that our staff might be in. We were at an uncertain future from what was happening before the CCO. Now that's becoming more clear. But I guess what I'm imagining is that the CCO will set up the roles that it has available, and you know, they may be offered to some of the existing staff. Rather than telling people they're now going to work for a different organisation, they sort of have to be asked if they want to.
Oh, yes, I don't think there's any notion that everyone's instructed. It's, yeah, but we're just working through the legal pathways on that, Gavin, but we are very mindful of, you know, the sensitivity around this, if you like, and staff's mindset.
I
It's
agree.
been constant change.
Because it has always occurred to me that we don't actually have a huge number of staff working solely in water services.
Yeah,
Because
yes,
considered our water services and other things.
that's
It's
right.
not a big, it's not a huge part of our resource.
Just wondering whether I'm too early for this question or not, but are we talking redundancy of QLDC staff to then be able to have an offer of another option within the water CCO? Is that the process?
That's not part of what we're here to talk about today, so I think we should take that to a separate conversation. So this is more about the technical arrangements. This is not about the people part of it. That is a separate process. So while the transfer agreement will outline the processes we agree on for that, that is going through a separate process with the CEs with support, appropriate support to ensure that that's done appropriately.
There won't be a governance question.
We're not at that point in the process yet.
It might
But
be,
this is more about the rest of it.
sorry, Penny, it might be helpful just to say that whatever decisions are made by both parties, our line of sight is really going to be about cost. So we're not going to be doing anything or making any decisions that's going to drive cost into all of this change when it's not necessary. So that's what
It
I'm
could
getting.
also be skill
Mm.
and appropriateness for the new.
Yes,
entrants.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cost is one thing, but not everything.
Melissa?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk or have a little bit more information about, I see that it's, like the planning interfaces. So this is a shared interest arrangement. So I guess there's a plan for how that's going to happen once the entity starts, but how are we making sure that's happening now as well to make sure we don't lose any momentum there?
So those shared interest areas are all areas that we are working together on and what they look like both now and in the future. And some of them might be more transitional arrangements, some of them might be more longer term. So that's all part of the work that has to happen between now and the end of the year in terms of how those areas will work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those shared interest areas are the key kind of points of interface after day one between the council and the water entity. So they're really important to QLDC. Obviously, QLDC wants the water entity to be successful in delivering water services, but in terms of that, into those interface points and the connections, that's really important that we get those parts right.
So obviously, water asset is much easier to identify and transfer. And the human aspect of, especially when we have people working across a number of different aspects within our organisation, which may not all be exclusively water facing. So that's a challenge. And I'm sure you'll get good advice on how that's managed. I think anyone that's ever prepared a business for sale, there's a lot of hygiene factors, isn't there? That's the working out the access, all of those things. And I imagine the organisation will probably discover a few things along the way, which will be good. I guess the question is who pays for that? Because in an ideal world, QLDC Inc. as is would have all of that stuff organised and hygiene, and would have all the information we need about how to access stuff, and it'll be written down. There'll be quite a considerable amount of work doing that. So is that all time sheeted across, or is that discussion between the board and QLDC as to where some of those costs lie? Because the board would say, well, hey, you guys should get your house in order before it comes to us, and as the organisation, we might say, well, we didn't need to do it until now. So I don't know. It's an open question, but just recognising that there will be probably a fair amount of work to do that.
Well, I think the reality is that work has been underway for some time now. And so we're in open, close communication about this, about anything that comes up along the way. But the intent has always been from the organisation side to be handing over something that is set up to succeed. So, really, we have tried to work through any issues we've found along the way, which have been minimal. Actually, we haven't found any significant issues so far. And, we'll just continue to prepare the organisation for transition as effective as possible.
Is that work paid for by
So essentially,
us or will it
what happens-
transfer cost?
so what happens with the, when the transfer happens is all of the existing costs to do with water are ring fenced and transfer. Any debt that relates to water that we've already incurred transfers. So if we're having work done now by people who work in water, those people, their processes, their work all transfers. What it costs is reflected in the costs of running water up until day one. And then whatever work happens going forward is incurred by the entity, not by us. A lot of that work is related to what people's kind of BAU jobs are. So they're doing that work now at the request of the establishment team. And if it doesn't involve consultants, we're tracking it, but it's being done by people who work in the water business anyway. So it's kind of built into the cost base. The costs of establishing the Maz can talk to more, but the cost of establishing the CCO and extra work that has to be done through there is being will transfer to the water entity.
Yes, I
If
think
it's debt related.
It's relatively tiny.
But
we've outlined in the transition agreement, the establishment budget and then potential company operating costs. And we've also indicated that there is council costs, which would be reasonable to expect that some of that may come across to the CCO, but there are some bespoke pieces of work that we haven't yet agreed. Where it reasonably sits, and I imagine that would be a discussion for myself and the incoming CE around, who's covering what portion of cost. I would then be talking to the board. So it's not exactly, it's all three waters, so it moves across.
Well, the reality is that if we're incurring the cost now and it's OPEX, it's spent by QLDC.
Yes.
All of these costs are QLDC costs. It's only if it's debt funded that there is anything that transfers to the water entity. So today,
at the moment, okay,
it's not.
that's fair. That's good. And obviously the transfer agreement on the principles is, sort of not much change for 3 years. But again, if I was sitting on the board, I might be saying, well, actually, there is some quite significant opportunities to be grabbed sooner, and notwithstanding without dropping the ball. So how do we manage that tension? I'm just going to discussion if the board say, actually, we'd like to do this, but that is going to have impacts here, and we've got an agreement that says there will be no impact. So how do we avoid locking out the opportunities that might be taken early on?
I think that would be, not wanting to speak on behalf of Julian and the board, but I think that will be as the process unfolds. So one of the things the board hasn't yet had sight of is the final draft, I suppose, for their comment of the statement of expectations. So that would be quite an important document as the board then sits down and starts looking at its water services strategy. And as that starts to take shape and thinking of the board starts to be woven into it, there will be discussions with council and consultation as we go through that. So I guess the simple answer is we don't have the answer today, but we have a very clear plan as to how that will unfold.
But the transfer agreement, is that sitting separate or is it informing the statement of expectation? Because you wouldn't want tension between the two different processes.
They should be separate. The transfer agreement is what's coming across to us. The statement of expectations is council's expectations as to what we do with it.
And there are elements of the transfer agreement that are about the arrangements we need to have to ensure that the statement of expectations can be delivered on. For example, some of the areas of the statement of expectations touch on those shared interest areas. So, and I would expect that in these discussions we're having about the statement of expectations, about the transfer agreement, about, all of the bits as we move through it, that the board will have views on that and they will bring them to these joint forums for discussion, so that they can be worked through.
And I think, fundamentally, we go back to that. We can't succeed separately. So I think there should be informed discussions about the topics and say, well, this might be the implications of QLDC, this might be the implications to water services. What is the best path forward? And we've already seen that start to happen, right, with the BLD contract. So I'm encouraged by the discussions that have happened today.
But am I right thinking the transition services agreement is also part of that equation? So the transfer agreement is the kind of
what comes across within the transition services agreement is more governs
There's a whole, yeah,
how we run.
we'll go through,
Yeah.
yeah, I've got a slide on that,
Yeah.
you're 100% right, there's a
Yeah.
whole artifact of a suite of legal documentation that will bring
Yeah.
all of this
And I
together.
think that the mayor's point was that we don't want to write a document that locks us into
Yeah.
things that might prevent either of us
Yeah.
from a better option.
Absolutely.
Question about legacy debt. So we have 700 million debt, and we hear from Catholic Marble round numbers of 500 will go to the CCO, might be 400, might be 600. But at some level, are we confident that we can identify every dollar in that debt that is water related or not really water related? Or is there a lot of overlap? Because this will impact the water bill that you send out.
Yeah.
And the rates bill that we send out.
Yep.
So how, I mean, yeah, we're all gonna work together, but at some level, you know, it's gonna be one of these things of, no, that 20 million is yours, no, it's, you know.
So
How are we gonna do that?
So yes, we are confident that that is suitably ring fenced because we've actually been legally required to ring fence it since July last year. Part of this process is agreeing the technical methodology for locking that in and getting assurance over that so that the board is satisfied that what they are receiving is appropriate. And so there will be a process we go through for that. The transfer agreement will outline the agreed process and it will outline the agreed debt that's transferring. But from Catherine's perspective, and from what we have already disclosed and stated to DIA through the Water Services Delivery Plan, we're confident that we know what the water debt is. So there was some areas identified where there was some overlap and we dealt with some of that before we issued the Water Services Delivery Plan, which isn't to say that that number might not change as we go through this process. As you get into a more granular methodology, it might. I doubt it'll be the difference between 500 million and 200 million, but you know, there might be differences at margin. We had actually already been through a process with the NTU for the previous water reforms because we were reasonably far advanced in that process to set up the original the entity D and then entity J. And we had used the methodology that had come from the NTU, from DIA. So
Do you have a feel for how much it's gonna pass over? Plus or minus, in terms of actual debt, 700 million, how much will pass to the new water entity?
off the top of my head, I wouldn't like to give you that number, but it's in our Water Services Delivery Plan. I want to say it's more like, I'm not going to put it.
So, Penny, though, you said that the board will need to be comfortable with that. Does that come back to council
Yes.
for it to be comfortable with as well?
Yes, yes, both sides need to be
Yeah.
comfortable with it.
So comfortable with the methodology,
With the
yeah,
methodology.
obviously the number is what from there.
Yeah, the number is the number.
Yeah. So, probably just conscious of time, you
I
have,
just have one question.
oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask, because the Act says, as you set out, there's a whole range of things that are required to be in the transfer agreement.
Yes.
And in some ways, they're sort of transactional. We've got to agree on the methodology, but at the end of the day, then sort of the numbers fall out inherently. I think it would be helpful, for me at least, if there are other issues in the transfer agreement that is a subject of negotiation. So which are the bits which are sort of have to be in this way, and which are the bits that we need some sort of negotiation over?
Because there could be trade-offs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there will be a range of things there that are negotiations. Because even the statutory things, the legislation says you have to agree on this thing, but what the actual agreement is around that thing there might still be different views on it.
So just to kind of play that back, when we talk about bringing the transfer agreement to you in chunks, you would like the settlement methodology as a single chunk that's tabled to each to make sure there's agreement at the governance level on that.
And the likelihoods that will need to be negotiated.
Yeah, because there's clarity around the mandatory things.
Yeah.
And then the matters that both sets governors can get to from.
So where there's discretion versus where there's not.
Keep going, Sinead.
So probably this slide is just saying like information gathering. So really just single evidence point for both documents being the water services strategy and the transfer agreement. Obviously, you can't have a strategy of age and asset unless it's coming across. So it's just really trying to make sure that there's consistency between those with obviously them branching off in different narratives at a separate time. So in terms of the validation, I think we've been through this. It's just presenting it to you in a different form. But key thing, we get the information, we validate the information, we update and action the action points, and we bring to governance. The legal terms we've talked about, and the intention is to separately workshop that with the board and with council to make sure each has an equal understanding and we have feedback in terms of the legal position. And Mark, happy to take on board your point there in terms of being very clear on what's mandatory versus discretionary. Part of what we will do is go through the land process, and that's just identifying obviously all of the land that water assets sit on and what's the ownership. It may not be council in all instances. And one of the artifacts that we need to bring back to council, and we will on it's the 13th of August, is the land transfer framework. So that was one of the things we agreed we would have input from council and the board on as part of the transition agreement. So that will be brought to you separately for input.
Who makes that call over who owns the land? Like, is that a discussion between us, or what are the principles for determining that?
Yeah, so the principles are something that need to be agreed between both parties. So that's the artifact that will come, and we would ask you to look at that. But I guess it's just being quite clear on respective positions as a starting point. So that once those transfer principles are agreed, then it should be a matter of just applying the principles to each parcel on an individual basis, and application should determine the outcome, and then that flows through.
There'll always be exceptions.
Always be exceptions, absolutely. But if the exceptions are few, which is always the hope, then they can just be dealt with or discussed through that. Generally speaking, when you've got specific facts in front of you, the way forward, the pragmatic way forward is quite obvious. But when you're dealing with things in a very abstract way, so it's really just getting what are the principles that apply. But absolutely, in light of the fact exceptions may be appropriate.
Yeah, I know as councillors we've talked about that before, so it will come back to us. I think a lot of it will be cut and dry, but you take like the rec ground outside, which is complex. Yeah, that's where we'll probably end up spending some of our time.
So the other thing that will cover is, so again, we went through this process as part of the original plan to transfer to Entity D. So we'd already been through a process applying all the principles from the NTU process, identifying land that was clearly water only use and land that was nothing to do with water and shared use, and been through a process of applying the principles around is it predominantly water or not, and therefore where might we think it would go. That didn't actually get any decisions on it because we didn't get that far in the process, but there's a big base of information to go on. The other thing that we had previously done was to Quentin, you raised this in the last workshop, as we looked at any land assets where, for example, there's a big piece of land that has a small pump station in one corner, and was the rest of that piece of land needed for water services, or should we set it up so that only this part of the land will transfer? So in that next session, we'll go through the background in terms of the work that has already been done, as well as a framework for the principles about how we would apply it for both board and council to have input into.
Had you looked at other models such as leasing rather than straight land transfer? Had you looked at that kind of depth of optionality?
We hadn't, because under the previous model, basically we were statutorily required to transfer it. It's different now, and Q has raised in one of our previous workshops, should the land transfer or should those other models be looked at? So that I expect that's something that will come up in that next workshop that we'd be really keen to hear both councillors and board members' view on. Thank you.
Cool. So Quentin's got a comment. Quentin.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, as was highlighted previously, I mean, I think that process by which the entity can dispose of land is really important, because land is really valuable in our district, and we need to be be pretty easy to rationalize land requirements and sell off the rest. Not saying that that's, but I think we should protect our community from that outcome. So.
And that, happy to say that will all be addressed in the material that's brought to you on the 13th, and then the board separately. And I think one thing I will say from my very kind of skimmed review of what council has done today, just to commend the management team for the fantastic work they did in the context of that. It's really a lot of work, a lot of thought went into it, and it is a very impressive piece of work. So just kind of noting that. So there's been some questions raised, and maybe I should have started with this busy slide, but I think what I wanted to be quite clear on is the transfer agreement is one document in a whole suite of legal documentation that makes this transaction possible. It is a transaction, and I know it's been driven by public outcomes, and I know it's about communities, but in order to make that happen, we just have to go through the appropriate legal steps. So I thought it might be helpful from a council perspective to put the legal documentation, I suppose, at a very high level in front of you. So as we know, at the moment, we've got the Constitution, which obviously sets the boundaries for what the entity is being established to do and what the board will get up to, which is essentially all things necessary to carry on a water organisation. We've got the transition agreement. So just going to the point earlier about how a shared interest is being managed as we go through, we've gone through a lot of time and effort to be clear on what that looks like between now and 1 July 27, with there being commitment from council to engage with the board on anything that would have an impact on the business being handed over to them. And part of the work we're doing is, well, what does that look like in practice and how do we bring that to life? But the agreement is there, and there is good collaboration. The other document that I know council has been working hard on and that we will get a draft of very soon is the statement of expectations. So statement of expectations will, as we know, inform the strategy set by the board, which itself then will be documented in the water services strategy. And there's a whole process that we have to go through, including consultation with the community, before that water services strategy is approved. So that's kind of going down the left-hand side and along the bottom of the slide in front of you. From a financing perspective, there was questions asked about, what's happening in that space. So we've got council is providing the establishment funding to the CCO at this point in time, as it doesn't have access to any other form of financing at this point. We are starting the process to obviously be admitted or accede to the LGFA multi-issuer deed. And through that, obviously, there will be access to borrowing from LGFA. We will need council to sign a deed of guarantee as part of that process, which is a mandatory requirement from LGFA. And then in terms of the bank guarantee, that's just there in terms of what's happened with others, and I'll leave it to the finance team as to whether anything along those lines is required. But I guess point being, from a council perspective, the requirement, or the ask, I guess, is the establishment funding, which you've kindly provided, and then at the appropriate time, LGFA documentation will be brought to you. In terms of implementing the transfer, we've talked about the transfer agreement. Transfer agreement is going to list everything that comes across, to the extent that that includes contracts, like OPEX contracts, CAPEX contracts, whatever they may be. We'll have to have a process to engage with the suppliers and ensure they have certainty as to what's happening, and then novation of the contract across to the CCO. And to the extent a decision is made that any interest in land will come across, we obviously need to go through the appropriate documentation that actually implements that from a LIN's perspective. From an operational perspective, I call them post-completion services. We can call them transition services. I think we're all on the same page as to what they are. But going to your point, Becky, earlier, yes, there will be a service level agreement, and that service level agreement will have an impact on a transitional basis on QLDC in the future, because once we pin down what are the services that the CCO needs to buy back from council, what's the level of that service, because there may be a slight change and the board hasn't had an opportunity to consider this, but what's the level of service that's going to be expected as council makes that commitment to provide the service. Obviously, from a council perspective, the key thing will be how much we're going to be paid for the provision of this service. We need to work through that. And then I think the key factor will be, how do we know everything is on track? And then if it's not on track, how do we get it back on track? Nobody wants to go to court. Nobody wants to sue anybody. Nobody wants the ordinary levers you would have in a contract. We just want to figure out how do you get it back on track. So the remedial process that we need to include in that. so that's on a transitional basis. So that's the services that are going to be brought back and for a period of time to be confirmed. And then as the CCO evolves, as QLDC of the future gets its wind under its wings, and there may come a time when we need to negotiate a separation and some alternative arrangement as to how the CCO receives those services. I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to have to take the question.
Guarantor. We are the guarantor of the airport's debt, ultimately. And we will be the guarantor. I'm using Stephen Brent. Stephen Brent's not obviously, but I'm using his specific word. We are the guarantor. We don't carry the water CCO on our balance sheet. We don't carry the debt on our balance sheet, but we are ultimately the guarantor. Is that correct?
Yes.
Brilliant. Nice answer.
Thank you. This diagram is generic, it's used for other contexts. It's got council plural in it, and so that makes sense. It's not been put together just for this context. But when you mention bylaw delegations, is it anticipated that means that with the existing bylaws that are sitting around water services and in relation to them, we'll need to clarify how that's going to work? Or do you anticipate there will be a need for new bylaws to support the CCO?
So if you think of bylaws in two separate buckets, you've got the existing bylaws at the moment, and when the water services comes across, one of the decisions council will make is, do you want to delegate the administration and enforcement of those existing obligations? So by bylaw delegations, that's what we're referring to in that context, and what does that look like? Other bucket is from under the legislation, there's a requirement on council, which the team is undertaking at this point in time, to review all of the water services bylaws and determine, are they consistent with the water services legislation? And they will bring a proposal to, the CCO will input into that, and we will bring that to our board. But a proposal has to be brought by no later than August 2027 to council, setting out what are the water services bylaws that need to be amended, revoked, defined as they are, whatever the case may be, there will be a proposal.
And perhaps new bylaws if necessary.
Exactly, exactly.
But we can't delegate the power to set a bylaw. So what this is about is how much of the bylaw management enforcement process is delegated to the water services entity. Council always has to do the bylaw, the setting of the bylaw.
So, quick question. Apologies, dropping straight down to the weeds, but we missed me not to talk about office accommodation. So let's say mayors and they want to recruit a stellar team, got the support of the board, and actually the most important thing for them is having their own standalone office somewhere as soon as possible. How does that sort of discussion fit into all of this chart?
Well, I think it's a decision for the CCO, but that is one that I would be discussing with the with council CE on what our sort of view is, where we might be heading with it. And we have actually already started those discussions just to see if there is any ability to share accommodation. Started at that side, and we've also started that discussion with the board. But ultimately, it's a decision for the board.
And similarly, those arrangements could potentially be transitional too.
Yes.
And for both sides, really, you know.
There are cost implications that need to be considered as part of that, as part of the transition cost, because obviously if we have existing accommodation that we are paying for, that we have a contract for a certain period, like how does that work? So there might be if there is a wish to have a separate standalone location, you know, there might be a period that, you know, over which we are transitioning to that, or, you know, so that is yet to be worked through. Cool. I did see the article about TRQI and their flash offices with a harbour view, which are actually on the Tony Esplanade, at the least flash place in Wellington. So,
okay.
I was just wondering if I could ask a question around, there was a service, so as the water entity separates away, currently within the council we've got a lot of sort of cross integration between departments. Do you envisage that level of service increasing significantly for QLDC to obviously pick up that new workload? What does that look like? with
Do you mean level of service where council becomes a service provider to the CCO? I think as CE, incoming CE of the CCO, I would be wanting to see some KPIs and some delivery matrix around, the service that we're going to be paying for from council. But again, that is something that we would mutually work on together, recognising that this is a new activity for council to become a service provider in a commercial sense. So, we'd have to work together.
And there might be some right sizing on QLDC side.
I mean, the teams are working through that, but you can remember it's a shared service arrangement between two entities that are basically in the public purse. So this isn't a commercial relationship in the sense that we're going to be creating sort of a profit line.
It's got to watch its space.
Yeah, it's just got it's shared cost as opposed to profit making exercise. But yeah, I mean, I think having some service level agreements and KPIs and reporting line keeps it nice and tidy for everyone. But the team's working through what that means in terms of scale.
On the QLDC, the future side as well, we'll be looking at that because, we're taking a service level approach with our, water services entity. Does that flow through into, how those teams, which are shared teams, servicing both QLDC and the water entity, flows through into how they operate for everybody, but also setting ourselves up for the future in terms of if we're going into discussions about amalgamation, wanting to be really clear on what the services are that those teams deliver and the levels of service to which they would internally serve.
Of course, the optics of the public is that because it's been separated out, and all of a sudden QLDC staff reduce completely. So, anyway.
The challenge will be with that shared services, as Penny's alluded to, is a lot of the people working in those spaces kind of absorb projects and programs as they come in, depending on the priorities that are set by this table.
Yeah.
When we're providing a clear shared service, that will have to be ring fenced and protected in a completely different way. Yeah. So, yeah, you raise a good point.
It will be extraordinarily complex. Because I imagine that's a shift over time between working in a council versus working in what will be essentially a utility company providing service to customers. It will be complicated for us to work through.
Yeah, there's lots of complications associated with it because you'll have two sets of expectations as well.
Yes.
So the idea of shared services is you're delivering the same service to all the parties that you're delivering the service to. So there'll likely become a point where the water entity might want a different service than the one that QLDC is getting, in which case there's no longer, you don't get the economies of scale then of a shared service because it's no longer shared because you're doing two different types of service. So
You have to do it a
all
little
that
bit,
has to be.
just do it more cheaply when you're doing it here rather than doing it there.
And we understand that there are lots of implications for QLDC, and I think being clear on what our needs are so that we can both work together our best. And it may only be a transitional arrangement because if we, end up with complex charging arrangements that just don't fit QLDC, you might say, well, the systems, you wouldn't want to take on that system development for something that you don't need anywhere else. But that will come out over.
And the intent is that the water services entity is delivering differently to our community. It's delivering through different mechanisms. So we're anticipating, again, thinking that 3-year cycle, the 3-year transition with the shared service arrangement gives us the ability to plan and move across in an iterative fashion, I guess.
Perfect.
Mindful of the time.
Yeah, I think I'm on last 2 slides. And so I guess we kind of refer to it as kind of eyes wider open transfer. So it really, the objective isn't for water services business is perfect. Going point, there won't be, there's a spring clean, there's work happening in council at the moment, but the intent isn't for everything to be perfect by 1 July 2027. The objective is to just really understand nuts and bolts, what's the business being transferred, cognizant of the fact that even with best endeavours, we'll probably get to maybe 60-70% knowledge as to what's coming across. But just really understand the business as much as we can, identify the risks and uncertainties, and give the board sufficient confidence in making an informed decision. And there is a typo there. I've noticed the extra S. There's only one board.
Forgive me for that.
Yeah. And so assurance that we're seeking to provide, just being quite clear, is, as I said before, understanding the business, understanding its condition, understanding the risks, and the risks of, it's a different risk profile. We're moving into a new legislative basis as well. So there is a little bit of shift, I suppose, in the perspective being applied than would have historically been applied by council. That's just a product of the reform and how it's being implemented. Understanding information gaps is obviously going to be quite key. And then from the board's perspective, just whether risks are acceptable. And that's not like, we're not in a position to say we're not going to take something, but it could be just that needs to be documented in a specific way. And I know we've referred to Taiki Way a few times, and we can all think of certain things they had to deal with in this bespoke manner due to the risk involved, but nothing like that here. And that is me and Penny.
Julian, in that assurance space, and we're talking here mostly in the transition phase, really, but are you anticipating that there will be a separate committee of the board that is a risk and assurance committee, or do you anticipate there will be external eyes on this? Do you have a feel for how that's going to work?
Not at this point, I would say. I mean, at the moment, my view is that I want the whole board across everything as we develop our thinking, because we've got some big challenges in front of us, and I want everyone contributing to that. So I'm not currently thinking of separate committees in this phase.
I think that's probably important to note for our councillors, though, that when you're talking about risk here, the CCO board will be developing their own risk appetite, understanding their own kind of way of building an understanding of risk, how they describe that to themselves. So risk framework and policy and their appetite around risk, and that will be in part driven by the legislative regulatory environment as well as other factors. So it won't be our risk appetite that is applied, and it won't be our risk framework. So that's not to say they'll start from scratch, because, you know, we have things that can be used, but I think that's important for the councillors to know, is that the risk, the appetite around the risks, and therefore what actions the board might ask to be put in place to reduce which risks and, you know, over which period will be determined by the board.
Sure, but there will be a degree of dependency between the two risk appetites and approaches, because there is overlap roles. But
there's overlap, yes.
There might be the negotiations.
Yeah.
And cool.
So our risk appetite, our risk appetite will be reflected through the statement of expectations.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Exactly 11 o'clock. Well done, everyone. You see the story closing the under it. Thanks, John. Great chat. What's the number? Yes. Okay, councillors, thank you. Welcome staff. Setting up our workshop this morning. Thanks for being here. For those who aren't joining online, or are still online, and I'm just going to hand over as we get the updates on the accessibility and disability inclusion work programme and policy. Thank you.
Chair Koto, thank you very much. I'm just going to do a little brief opening, just to reflect on where we've come from. So in 2018, I wasn't that long in council, but there was no disability policy at council at that time. So we drafted the first disability policy, which was great. And there was definitely a lot of buy-in from staff at the time, but we didn't have capacity to really do a lot of a broad implementation program around it. So we're at a point now where we want to refresh the policy and bring in a bit more structure into how we can actually bring about some cultural change and bring about some perhaps some processes that really help us be more inclusive and accessible in our various range of services we deliver. So I'm here today with Marie Schmidt, who's the other Marie from the Community Partnerships team, and Luke Place from our policy team. So Marie will be talking about the program itself, and Luke will tell us about the policy we can understand if needed. Thanks. Hand over to Marie.
Thank you, Marie. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so my name is Marie, the other Marie, that's right. And yeah, it's my first time here speaking to you, councillor, so I'm really excited. This is great to meet you all in person, although I've seen some of you around.
So yes, thank you for the opportunity. I have brought many notes. So, don't mind me if I flick around my notes here. Oh, no, I'll do that. Yes, thank you. So, why we're here today, we want to give you a bit of an overview of what we have in plan about the accessibility and disability inclusion work, give you some context about where we're at, where the community is at, and outline the proposed process and content of the work, and give you also a little bit of visibility what's coming up before the formal policy discussions begin. So today is just a briefing workshop, but we are still very, very interested in hearing any thought or feedback or anything that you want to share with us that you think is important as well. Now, how is disability understood? I do want to start a little bit with language because it does shape how everything else works in our program. The definition is there on the screen. So the New Zealand Disability Strategy uses this definition, but also the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I almost couldn't read that one, maybe need some glasses as well. They're defining a person or persons with disabilities, that the disability is an impairment that you have, and interaction with barriers in the environment is what can hinder full participation in society on an equal basis with others. Now, there's two ways how our organization could see, or organizations like ours can see disability. And there is the very traditional model, the medical model, traditional approach, more in the medical context, hospitals, diagnosis, and it does have a space, and it's important for the diagnosis or to access any sort of support. But then there is the social model that the NZDS, so the New Zealand Disability Strategy, and also the UNCRPD use, that people have impairments. So people have impairments, but the barriers is actually society the society creates a disability through the barriers. I'm going to give an example because that sounded all a little bit broad. So if you are, for example, a wheelchair user, this is a very classic example, but we can follow with that one, and you have steps. You cannot reach the building, so you are in the moment disabled and feel disabled because you cannot reach. However, if we were to reduce those, remove this barrier, so instead of steps, we have ramp or whatever else we come up with, then the person no longer is disabled in that moment because the person can participate in that activity, in the experience. So that is the approach behind the program, the social model. And so the lens that the rest of the work program sits inside on is our role is not to fix, but we want to remove the barriers that we can control in QLDC. Just a little bit of community context. So you have all these stats on there. We have about 17% people living in New Zealand households disabled through the 2023 household disability survey. We got those numbers, but more in the, I guess, understandable number, that would be 1 out of 6 people living in New Zealand. Now, we all know the context of our community and our district is that, we're growing fast. So we can only assume that also the disabled community in our district is growing. Now, disabled people, the 17%, that wouldn't necessarily include any people that have just temporary impairments or like injuries, or older people or people that are aging, which is also rapidly increasing, and we are want to cater to in a way. Now, you would also see that the survey here was from 2023, 3 years old. Our disability policy was from 2018, so we consulted with that community back then, but it's quite a while ago now. So it's definitely time that we go into our communities and find out a little bit more. Now, looking at our work program that we are trying to build here. So we have two key components of the work program. That one is a refreshed disability policy. So looking at 2018, not completely reinventing the wheel, but building on it and finding more background and more substance and foundation to it. And then the big part of this is the accessibility action plan. So not only having a disability policy that states our intent, what we want to do, that is facing towards the community, and I guess this is what we like to do. We want to go a little bit further this time and actually have some sort of mechanism that can track our progress, that we can see how we are actually going. And really important here is the guiding aspect of this work program, and that's where it might be also a little bit different from other work programs, not fully, but a little bit, is that input of lived experience. Nothing about us without us. It's a really, really strong foundation in the disability community. There is something like we doing it for them. We're looking after, like more in a charitable sense, like we're looking after our disabled community. That's sort of a no-go. We want to really have disabled people and people with access needs in the room, or we coming to them into the room and have their input in the work that we do. Now, I have a really hectic diagram here on the right side as well. So I'm just going to talk briefly to it. At the moment, the disability policy is facing outwards. So these are, we have 8 policy goals. We go into that a little bit later as well. You can have a look there. But it is more about, our intent. Now, there is no definite mechanism how this is activated within council. So at the moment, our teams are doing different things. There's great work already happening within QLDC just for people wanting to do the right thing. But with that action plan and the refresh of the disability policy, we want to have that bit more streamlined and organized to flow into the different work streams. So this would be how the disability policy sort of looks inside the organization, which have influence of the cultural change within council, how our organization is maturing, and lots of capability building for our staff. And across the organization of all levels, we will deliver more accessible services and hopefully then building a more accessible district where everybody can participate. And that is a part that is community facing there. Whole organization approach, so kind of reflected in that evidence-based coming in here. So we just didn't want to just rely on ourselves, and we want to do the right thing and we're looking inside instead of us assessing ourselves. We brought an external partner in, which is the New Zealand Disability Employers Network. So this is an organization that is strongly connected throughout the disability sector. They're working with different council, for example, Tauranga Council or Auckland Council on this exact work. They're supporting different employers for their staff to have something to fall onto, resources, training, a lot of training. But particular for us in this space is a project in assessing where we at. So we know where we have to improve. So what they're doing at the moment with us is reviewing the existing information that we have. So this might be just strategy. We're going through different parts of, where is the issue? What are we actually trying to solve? Because we think, yes, this is not so great, that is not so great, but we want it really evidence-based, not just make it up on the go. They are helping us also in the community survey. So like I mentioned before, there is a strong desire and need to connect to our disabled community or any community with access needs, people with access needs. So we're having good plans there in place to do that, and I'll go into that a little bit more. They're also going to give us a good outcome and recommendation support, so that will help shaping that work program and give a lot of input into the refresh of the disability policy, and will help develop the accessible action plan. Now, I do want to share this one here. So this was really exciting exercise that we did with our staff earlier this year. So we wanted to, again, get a bit of a feel how our staff actually feels about this topic. We had 130 participants of our staff, which was actually a pretty strong turnout for an internal survey of this kind. You can see actually 75 were aware that we have that policy, but there's a bit of a gap. Only 50% were very clear on how that actually applies to their work. So that was a strong indication and a strong finding from the survey, actually. Okay, yeah, seeing that gap, and really what made me really happy, and I was having a bit of a dance about this, was 57% want to stay involved in that work, which is awesome. So accessibility is valued in our organization for the staff. They want just a bit more guidance and tools, leadership. You see that is, I put the whole summary of that survey into the appendix of the slides deck, so you can have a read later if you wanted to see. Our consumer did really awesome work putting that nicely and digestible into a document. So it's a lot of quotes, what this means for us. It's really, really great to see. So some don't see accessibility as an add-on. They see it as fundamental, how we design, plan, and deliver services. Now, this is our policy making process, and Lucas is just going to talk to that a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. So I guess the purpose of the slide is to demonstrate that we intend to follow a robust policy making process, as we would with any plan, policy or strategy that we make at council and talk through with you. It sets out just really basically what the steps will be, and that we're at the very start of this process. So we're identifying the issues at the moment that the policy and the action plan need to address. And as Marie talked about, we'll be working with the New Zealand Disability Employers Network to work through what those issues look like for our community and for our visitors, and also looking at what the existing policy, how that's worked, and how it's contributed to outcomes for our disabled community. And yeah, we'll look for the second quarter of next year to present council with revised policy.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry to interrupt because I know you're nearly through, but one of the things that I think as councillors are often concerned about is that we'll sort of go into a policy, we'll adopt a policy or come out with actions, but really is there money to deliver? Because, you know, sort of part of the policy process should be identifying actually for us some outcomes, how do we fund them? Because otherwise it's just another policy, right, which will have a lot of value. So noting that as implementation, you know, partly within this year's annual plan budget, looking at the time, is there a placeholder figure for doing things?
Yeah. Through the chair, yes, there is within the community partnerships budget, we have some funding to support implementation activities to a certain extent around once we've obviously identified what those are. But there would be an expectation across council once we identify different teams and departments for them considering what that might mean for their own work program and their own budgets. You know, what is the property team going to be doing? I know they're looking at that already. How does that factor into their maintenance programs or new development of new facilities in the future? What's the building team? What could they be doing? And it could be quite as simple as improved comms. So what we're putting forward here isn't necessarily building a whole lot of big change. We obviously recognise we're in a difficult fiscal environment, but it's very much around culture shift and making sure people are thinking about those things when they develop their own work programs and
Delivery
budgets.
will be, as you say, across the different arms of the organisation. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a question of how we work. If you look in other countries, it is second nature. It's like safety culture. It's just part of the way people think of work. We need to shift to that.
I love it, it's great stuff. The survey of staff, so 130 respondents, was it went out and it was just random, anyone could just self-select and do? Did you, I had a quick look through there and I get accused of speed reading stuff way too speedily. So, but did you get a feel for that from, because you talked about departments and focus, did you get a breakdown of where people were from or was it anonymous?
Yeah.
Was that informative?
Yes, so there was a lot of community service
I
or
would have thought.
customer facing, but it was across the team. It was
Right.
every single department was listed there. So and every single department was also listed in I want to be involved in further activation.
Great.
But yeah, especially those customer interactions, that's where people notice where things go wrong. And where we
Things
don't
that we do regulate.
Yeah.
Other parts, aren't they? So thank you. I'm glad you did. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no, that's all good. Just another point to add to this. Yes, it's different departments, but there's also a lot of work that is already happening and already budgeted for, and there's a lot of easy and low cost wins as well. So yes, we can thinking elevators and big ramps, but we can also think just setting up a PDF document differently so it can be read out by assisted technology. So it's like big and small things. I think there was a
question from Quentin. Yeah, Quentin.
Yeah, thank you. And firstly, great to see some progress on this space for obvious reasons. And I was pleased that back in whatever it was, 2018, that the council were able to respond at the time for a request for a policy, which was good. It's good to retouch on it now. There's a couple of things I just wanted to note. I mean, I think this is great work. I think we've got to improve legibility or sort of understanding within the organisation. I'm aware of a couple of situations which I won't go into now where I think accessibility and disability have been unintentionally disregarded or not taken into account. So there's a sort of an aspect of sort of training and awareness that needs to go on. And just to highlight in terms of when you're asking about is there money, one of the schemes that I've seen in New Zealand that I thought had a lot of merit was one they undertook in Tauranga where they had a set budget per annum, and I think it was around $200,000 or something, where they invited the disability community to tell them where the barriers were, and how to make their local neighbourhoods or whatever more accessible. And I thought that was a really powerful program, and it was really well communicated. So if we, to want of a better word, walk the talk, we might consider something like that in the LTP if we're to, notwithstanding that we often find ways to fund things when they need to happen. But for instance, we've known about the Lake Wanaka Centre for a long time, but never been able to fund a solution for it. So, but anyway, just thought I'd make those comments. But thanks for the work. I can support it. Yeah.
Amazing. And we still have time to do a bit more discussion, so definitely I'll throw them in however you want. I just wanted to speak briefly about the policy that we have at the moment. So Marie has already given a bit of feedback around it and context. You can see we have 8 policy goals, and they cover you know, the broad aspects of everything. And it's still the early feedback that we've got from NZDN is that this is a pretty solid document. But how we touched on earlier as well, we have policy goals, but we don't have that mechanism to measure it. We don't have a plan or the manpower behind it to deliver on it in a coordinated way. So that's something that we want to work on. Luke has linked in this, the policy as well. We have it in the appendix as well if you wanted to look a little bit deeper into that.
Out of interest then, why, well, yes, we have to do a review, I get that. Are we looking at changing it fundamentally? Because from what you're saying is, it's actually a good policy. On a national level, it's pretty well regarded.
Yes.
The problem is the implementation of that policy within the organisation.
One part, yes, and we'll go a little bit deeper about the rationale for review. But what is really important is that at the moment we have a disabled community, but that disabled community might have not given any input on their policy, and the environment has changed a lot in the last 8 years. So what we want to know is this even valid for you guys? Like, does it make sense? So we want that input from them as well.
So that didn't happen in the iteration of the first policy.
It did. It did.
No, I thought it would have.
8 years later, this might look very different than what it looked back then.
Sure.
Yeah, good question.
So a few important points on the rationale for the review. So the purpose of local government obviously talks about how we have an expectation to recognise the diversity of our community, and that has a broad meaning and includes people who have disabilities, but also take a broad role at promoting our community's well-being. And Marie also talked earlier about the UN Declaration of Rights of Disabled Persons, which is a UN convention that New Zealand ratified in 2008. And while it's not necessarily a legislative or statutory requirement for Council to give effect to that, it provides really important guidance for QLDC and for all other public organisations in New Zealand to work towards for recognising the rights of disabled people. The New Zealand Disability Strategy has just been renewed, so it's quite good timing for us in terms of this work that we're doing, and then it provides us with contemporary guidance and aspirations at a national level that we can pick up on and make sure that we're being consistent with. So it's developed by the Ministry of Disabled People, and once again, it doesn't set out statutory requirements for Council, but it does provide that national aspiration and demonstrates the intent of central government agencies, at the very least, how they're going to give effect to the needs of disabled people in a contemporary context, given that it's really new, so that's really good, and sets out some really good key principles for us and some best practice that we should be seeking to take guidance from.
So you're saying, so there's no requirement for Local Government Act specifically other than wellbeing. Have you looked at the emergency management bill?
I haven't looked specifically with regards to disabled people.
It absolutely requires all planning bodies, including local authorities, to do exactly what you're doing in that understanding risk context, so that's at least one legislative lever.
Yep.
And that will be assured in the future. There will be people coming here once we've done it ourselves to see how well we're doing it. So I think it's a good thing, but it has been identified in the past that disabled people have at least felt it's not included, even though people have been working bloody hard to make sure they are. But so there's one lever. Thank you for the overview. Otherwise,
appreciate it. Thank you.
I also wanted to share just briefly what other councils are doing. So there is a few councils that are doing it really well, and I've listed them here. There's also councils that have, similar to us, the disability policy a little bit older, or they have a bit broader. But these are really good examples of how to do it well. So Auckland Council, they have a standing disability advisory panel, and they're reporting twice yearly. Wellington as well has an action plan, and they have to submit an annual progress report
To the council.
to the council. Yeah, yes. Hamilton have an action plan, and yeah, Tauranga as well. And what I find really good with those two is that, which is really good with those two, is that they're embedded in different strategies. So it's not just a standing thing by itself, isolated, but no, it's embedded in inclusive city strategies or any other strategies. So it can be referenced back and forth, which is really nice.
A bit more QLDC specific rationale. There's lots of things that council has created quite recently which supports the work that we're doing, and an update of the policy in particular, including our strategic framework, which talks about how we need to ensure that we have a diverse approach, an inclusive approach when we are thinking about making decisions for our communities. The QLDC community research work, in particular the quality of life survey, the community insights survey that we conduct, demonstrates that there is some work that we need to do to make sure that we are removing barriers as much as possible for people who have disabilities of all types. So that's a really important sort of direct piece of feedback from our community that supports the work. Marie talked about how the policy is now 8 years old, so we really need to look at that, make sure that we're responding to our new disabled people who live out the new community that you represent today. We've developed our diversity, equity, inclusion statement, which has some really important words in there around how we expect to foster a culture of respect, inclusion, diversity in all the work that we do. And as well, there's some costs and opportunities for council, depending on how the way it recognises and responds to disabled residents and visitors. It's a real opportunities to make sure that if we do a good job with regard to inclusive decision making, there's lots of costs, lots of opportunities and costs to avoid. That's me.
Mm-hmm. Next step. So just a brief overview of what's coming up. So at the moment, we are deep into that assessment, and we are engaging with our staff. So we had our first lunch and learn on disability confidence just happening yesterday. There will be community engagement, as mentioned before. So we have a survey coming out on disability, on accessibility and inclusion in August. Face-to-face workshops end of October, both in Queenstown and Upper Clutha side, more self-capability, and the policy drafting, obviously, throughout this, also based on the recommendation and outcome report from NZD and end of the year. We're aiming to have the adoption of the policy around May. But there will be plenty of opportunity for you as well to give input, to be part of it as well if you wanted to, and the extent and capacity that you have. But yeah, the more the merrier. And I think we can open for question unless you wanted to say something else.
No, I think that was great. So,
I've got 3 pages of questions.
Yeah, let's go.
I'm going to start just with the data and assumptions, I guess. So nationally, 17% of New Zealanders or residents live with some form of physical or neurological challenge. I assume it's physical and neurological we talk about here.
Yeah.
If we apply those stats here, can we assume then that around 9,000 residents live with some form of disability?
We had 15% or something like that, and
Well,
And
I
that-
read in the policy,
Yeah.
it says 26% rotated Southland, so are we even higher than that? Again, my assumptions are based on national averages. So as we form this policy, how do we collect good data, I guess, on our district to understand what's actually happening within our population? Because again, based on that, 100 of our staff would live with some form of disability.
And you would be surprised, that might be not too far off.
Yeah.
Because it is a bit broader. It's not I'm in a wheelchair, it's also
May not
I'm
be visible.
ADHD, yes, or I have, like I said, some neurodivergence, which is also part of it. But it might also be that I have a temporary disability, or that, I'm aging. So it is actually quite a lot. And then if it's not you, it might be somebody in your family. Yeah.
Lived experience, not necessarily yourself.
Yes, yes.
I'd love to, as I said, work on making sure we have really good data on our staff, the organisation, because some of that empathy potentially is because maybe we don't have the large representation that we see nationally or within the wider district. Hence why there's 43% don't want to be involved in this anymore. And I find it a little bit shameful as an organisation that there's 43% of staff don't want to have more involvement in this, because I think it should be naturally integrated in our organisation. And the fact that it's not, is a little bit disappointing, given the size of the community that does live with disabilities. So
I would just note that we have about 600 staff and there were 130 respondents.
yes,
So
correct.
it's, of the people that were engaged to respond to the survey. So yes, I take it 43% does sound bad, but that is of the 130, not the full 600.
It could be that they don't think it's part of their role
Yes,
as well, depending how they approach the question.
Yeah, possibly. And this leads to many more questions about how departments should be responding to this policy, and it doesn't necessarily have to cost a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
It's just being aware and actually just doing little tweaks around design and those sorts of things. So anyway, I'll leave it there because everyone else has probably got heaps of questions, but I'd love to be involved with this.
That's amazing. No, and I really appreciate it. That's so good. One thing that I want to say, internally facing is one thing, and our team from organizational development, they're really keen to be involved in the work and see how they can put their lens on it as well. So it's not just coming from community partnerships. And then to find the picture, what it really looks like of the district through, community partnerships, we have quite strong connections into these different organizations and groups. So we're hoping to get really good data back from them as well, and really, since we have that base level of connection and foundation with them already, that we have a lot of them.
Even if we use the national average, we're still almost 10,000 people.
Yeah,
That's
a lot.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that we're looking for from this table really is to ensure that this becomes an organisational priority. Right? Many competing priorities, many competing pressures. So if we are looking to weave this into the way that it's working really effectively, it's support from this.
You see it within commercial organisations. It's always making money's first.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily the priority, but you can weave it in quite easily without having to cost too much money.
It's interesting. I just had a bit of a squiz. Destination Queenstown promotes the district as a disabled visitor friendly place to come, and then provides examples of businesses that either represent themselves as doing so or actually are. There's probably an overlap. No. But so there's opportunities there, but then in the wider community, that's harder to say, isn't it?
Well, I think one of the key experiments you do is you get off the airport and can someone in a wheelchair, for example, take public transport to Queenstown?
Yeah, but very slow. Yeah, sorry.
Well, the answer is probably no. It's
Not
challenge.
public, no, yeah.
Yeah,
On a bus.
Yeah.
that's it.
Anyway,
Quentin's got a question or comment.
Oh yeah, just to touch on a couple of things. I mean, I think that I just wanted to touch on those statistics that I mean, you're right that there's lots of different types of disabilities that often they're unseen, and they can be anything from hearing aids through to legal blindness and neurodiversity. So it's a broad church, and the Yeah, so it's not all about wheelchair ramps and things like that. The other issues, I mean, the other issues which I think are particularly noticeable in this district is people with disabilities are underhoused, underemployed, and struggle to get access to healthcare. So those things are, you know, locally, which are a real challenge. I mean, I count myself very fortunate is that because we own our house and it's been adapted for wheelchair use, I've got somewhere to live. But if I had to rent in this district, I would be in real trouble. You know, because trying to find an accessible house would be a nightmare. So, you know, we've got to, I've done a little bit of work with the Housing Trust to sort of say, are you providing, you know, at least a proportion of your houses that are accessible for people with disabilities, because they are often on fixed incomes, they're often on those sort of things. Accommodation, it's really hard to travel for some people with disabilities, and the information that is provided by most accommodation providers is really poor. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that while, you know, this is the work that we're doing, and at a broader level, there's a whole bunch of different things that, and as someone said about public transport, I mean, if I wasn't able to have a car and get around myself, you know, it would be incredibly challenging. We don't have wheelchair taxis in this district. We don't have, I mean, people, just last week I had a contact from someone saying this person's coming skiing at the adaptive program, you know, how do we get them up the ski field? And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that. We just don't have those services available in our community. So, you know, there's some real broad challenges that, yeah, anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Any more questions or? No, for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It'd be great to see this work through, and love the fact that, you know, down there you've got that digital, you know, communication piece, how we present information in different forms. Really important. Okay.
More loading zones so they don't be vehicles in disabled parks.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tradies that take it.
And yeah, I just want, yeah, absolutely. I think, look, this is a conversation that I think a lot of people are really interested in, and they do, once you start talking about it in the community, I think we'll get much more engagement around this topic. Just to finish off, I think the point you've raised around data is really important. The survey we're about to do is the first of our own local surveys. So the intention is for us to repeat that every 2 or 3 years. We've decided on what the cycle might be, but to maintain and monitor that whatever we end up doing here is having an impact, and that we can measure that impact. Yeah.
Is there an administrative data set for people who receive services or support that you can sort of access metadata about who's in the community? Who, I mean, that's only a subset of people with disabilities, clearly, but is that available to you?
I mean, the data we get from the health sector is challenging, and again, they're not always health sector related, as we mentioned earlier. So we can get Otago-wide data usually, but that would be a piece of work that we'd have to collaborate with sector partners that work in those areas that have that data that could share that. We might have to
like
MSD,
a lot of
for
interest.
example.
Like a lot of interest groups, there are networks that you can target as well. Like the New Zealand Spinal Trust has a very good network. You could put it out through the newsletters and Facebook pages and stuff like that. And there's, for many of the different sectors of disability, there's interest groups like that.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that would be a piece of work that would be part of this.
Yep.
How do we get that better picture?
Happy to help.
Excellent
stuff.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank
you.
Nice down to that presentation.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, John.
Oh, sorry. See that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, great conversation. Just something simple that that could be done immediately is just a little bit more control of vehicles parking on footpaths. There's a constant issue in certainly the Upper Clutha of vehicles either parking on, partially obstructing or fully obstructing the footpaths, which obviously creates a hazard for people with sight difficulties, people with wheelchairs, people with strollers, etc. So that's something simple that council could do a little bit more education and control of.
Yeah, I'll second that, and I forgot my peeve too. Wheelie bins. I'll look at that.
That's your own disability then.
No, they do cause.
They do.
They have sort of impediments to using the footpaths.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, John. And all of those points, I think this is an opportunity to bring them to life.
Yeah.
Start to talk about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So.